welcome back to the New Tradition, the podcast where Isaiah Campbell and myself, Matthew Barnes, document our journey to understanding the ideas and forces that work in our world. This is episode 5, where we're going to be talking about Job. Oh, there goes my camera, holy smokes. We're going to be talking about Job and a few other things along those lines. Um,
Yeah.
so, Isaiah, how are we starting this off?
Yeah, so to start off, I think I want to kind of talk about my theory on reading. I believe that all books are kind of in their own rights invitations to contemplation, like an invitation to exchange consciousness between the author and the reader. And you see this in secular works, but I think in spiritual works, that offer of communion and contemplation is linked directly to God. I think Job, the book of Job, is one of the kind of biggest calls to contemplation because it asks some of the hardest questions. Like the character of Job is asking some very hard questions, and the Yahweh, the God presented in the book of Job, is is very hard to wrap your mind around.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So, do you want to give maybe a brief overview of what the story is for people who maybe are not super familiar with it, just like the general outline of the story?
yeah, do you wanna give the outline of the story real quick?
Oh, okay, sure. Um,
That's all right.
so, once upon a time, interestingly, the we're not really sure when Job is supposed to take place.
So
Roughly, there are a
allegedly,
lot
it's
of
supposed to have taken place very probably one of the closest books right after Genesis,
yeah. It's
like the story of
theorized that
Genesis.
it
Yeah.
was it if it did take place, it was shortly uh, sometime between like the Tower of Babel and
Mhm.
like I don't know, probably like the Israelites entering the Promised Land, something around
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
but no one really knows. Um, and there's also a question of if it's supposed to be actual history or if it's purely like allegorical. Um,
Mhm.
so, anyways, um, this is kind of going off a little bit about what we were talking about with Satan 2 episodes ago, which is one day um, uh, God was holding court in heaven, and then Satan shows up, or the Satan, as he's known in the Jewish Bible, shows up, and God's basically like, "Hey, man, what's up?" And like, what have you been up to, and what are you doing? And Satan goes, "Well, I've been walking to and fro around the earth, and I've been basically like testing people. In the Jewish tradition, it's Satan is the adversary who is sent to test humanity and test like their righteousness and virtue. In Christianity, he takes on a different form, which is he's the devil, like the source of evil, kind of in reality. But then and so God says, "Well, have you tested or have you considered Job yet?" So basically, have you tested him? And he's
Mhm.
he's like one of my top guys, you know. And and so sorry, I just made myself laugh. Um, and so
Were you
then
thinking of the Sam Hyde clip?
yeah, yeah.
That's what I was thinking about
Yeah.
too. What am I gonna do? I'm God's top guy. What am I gonna do? I'm
No.
Yahweh's top guy.
Oh man, I'm God's top guy. Anyways, so anyways, um, Job is like kind of a really wealthy dude. He's very similar. I think of him as very similar to like Abraham. He's like the good guy version of Abraham, sort of, because Abraham
Mhm.
does some kind of wacky stuff in his story, but then Job is like the version of him that was like he was like there and he was like there 100%. Yeah. So he's a good guy. He's basically like your modern like middle class, upper middle class American, pretty much. He's got like everything. He's got the kids. He's got the house. He's got the car, and he's got kind of everything. And so then God, um, lets Satan have a go at him, and Satan just kind of like takes away everything from him, and
Mhm.
like just curses him into oblivion, and then and so the test that Job has to go through is, am I going to? It's kind of what his wife tells him, because his wife is the one thing he doesn't lose, and his wife goes, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" And so then, so there's that, and then some friends of his come over to console him, to give him some encouragement, and they do, but they also say, "Hey, maybe you gotta look at yourself." I find we should talk about this too, because I think the friends are, we kind of misread the role that all the three guys that show up and talk with him have, but we'll get into that
Mhm.
later. And then so eventually Job comes to his wits end, and God shows up and talks with him, and he goes. God talks a lot about. He kind of talks about how he created the world and is like the head honcho of the universe in very similar language to how um, the ancient Mesopotamian creation story talks about it, which is very interesting, which we should talk about as well. Um,
Mhm.
go into some Joseph Campbell with that. And after God talks with him, I can't remember exactly. I think Job kind of like gets humbled, and then he gets he gets his stuff back, and it says that he gets it back like two or three fold, I think, or something like that.
Mhm.
And so he gets becomes much more wealthy after.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the version of Job that's been like commonly presented, and it's the version that answers the hard questions in the easiest ways possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think today what I want to do is kind of like ask a lot of the questions that have arisen in my mind while reading Job, and also in the mind of like I was reading Jung's answer to Job,
Mm-hmm.
and he kind of asked some hard questions too, and he has some answers to those questions that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm probably going to point out a couple times just to see where we're at.
Okay.
Um, so one question I want to ask you um, is why why does Yahweh? Oh, actually, one thing I want to point out is it's very interesting. I think that a lot of people try to kind of ignore this, but the Yahweh in the Old Testament and the New Testament are very different.
Yes.
Um, and you can say like, oh, they're the same God, and yes, that's true. They are the same God, but they are very different in the way that they, uh, I guess, do good or distribute justice or
The way
righteousness.
they're portrayed.
Like
Yeah.
the way the idea that Job has in mind of God, and you can see this through his struggles in the beginning of his struggles, is he's like where he's kind of like um a kind of like psalmist type of thinking, like where is my vindicator at? Like where's my justice? Like God, I've been like so good to you, and like I've earnestly like have like I've been walking justly under you. Why are you not responding to me with justice? So that's the kind of question that arises is like if God is such a just God, why does he allow Job to go through these trials? Like why does he let Satan whisper in his ear and be like, what about Job? Like, you sure Job is good? And God's like, oh yeah, test him out, see where it
Mm-hmm.
is. So we see like kind of this like very like human type of God where it's like he's suspicious and he's like trying to test his people. And it's like, why? Why does that need to arise? Like why exactly?
Yeah.
And this is like the notable distinction between this is because Christ hasn't fully entered the picture yet. And even he's kind of pseudo entered the picture. So you kind of have to like, in order to like really understand Job or understand the broader concepts, you kind of have to like detach yourself from a lot of like timelines. It's like you have to think of like the happenings of creation and fall, like re-happening over different events.
Hmm.
Like for example, like creation and fall happens in the garden. Creation and fall happens like that kind of like fall happens with like Cain and Abel. It happens again at the Tower of Babel. It happens like you have to
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
really like start to think about like these like mass events occurring almost like simultaneously and like these like repercussions throughout history. So
Yeah.
yeah, so like let's go into that. Like why
Yeah.
so what Jung says about this is his kind of thesis, if I can paint kind of like a broad picture of like his kind of like I guess answer to Job is, and I'm gonna have to sum this up in a little bit. There's a lot of moving parts with this, but it's that when Job is going through these trials, he becomes very aware of God's nature. It is a nature that God's not exactly aware of himself. So
Mm.
because God is omniscient, he kind of lacks, and it's hard to say this because we don't want to admit that God lacks anything,
Yeah.
but at least the Yahweh presented in the Old Testament during the story how it was written, this character lacks consciousness. He lacks the same amount of consciousness that like a human has because humans were not infinite, because we're not omniscient. We have to have this relation to time where we are constantly recollecting from
Mm.
the past and we are like perceiving into the future through these events.
Yeah. So I think
And
it's yeah. I think
go ahead.
it's a lot like what Harold Bloom was saying in the Book of Jay. It's and
Mhm.
it's not just him. There's I think I've referenced it also. Jordan Peterson, in his Maps of Meaning lectures, is talking about the development of God throughout history as parallel to the development of human consciousness, which isn't
Mhm.
to say that God doesn't exist, but it's the way that we can
Mhm.
conceptualize him changes and evolves as humans develop with like civilization and our own psychology, and
Mhm.
and so then it's yeah, and so what Harold Bloom would say is that when um, he sees all the characters in the Bible as literary characters, including God.
Mhm.
Um, he never says God doesn't exist, but what he's saying is that this depiction of God is not actually God.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it would be well, it's kind of like an idol, I guess. But um,
Mhm.
what he's saying is that there's a clear um, it's like what you were saying, like the God of the New Testament, the God of the Old Testament are very different. It's because different
Mhm.
people had their hand in writing,
Mhm.
basically, and like adding to this character, which is
And there's a
why,
differing of consciousness too.
right? And because like the in the Old Testament, it's written, how long before, like 1,000 years maybe before Jesus
Mhm.
shows up, and that's like that's a huge span of time for civilization to develop and also for psychology to develop. Um, I'm reading uh, I'm reading Oriental Mythology right now by Joseph Campbell, and the book starts off by talking about how the um, shoot, what is it? Let me just find the quote real quick. It's pretty cool. He's talking about how the uh, the West and the East have two like incredibly different forms of thinking, and
Mhm.
um, and sorry, 1 second. Let me just find this real quick. Mm, it's in like the introduction or something. Mm, let me see if I think I may have taken a picture of it and sent it to you at one point. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Yeah. Um, two completely opposed mythologies talking about like the West and the East of the destiny and virtue of man, therefore have come together in the modern world, and they're contributing in discord to whatever new society may be in the process of formation. For the tree that grows in the garden where God walks in the cool of the day, the wise men westward of Iran have partaken of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, whereas those on the other side of that cultural divide in India and the Far East have relished only the fruit of eternal life. However, the two limbs, we are informed, come together in the center of the garden, where they form a single tree at the base, branching out when they reach a certain height. Likewise, the two mythologies spring from one base in the Near East. And if man should taste of both fruits, he would become we have been told, as God himself, which is the boon that the
Mhm.
meeting of East and West today is offering to us all. And so I think so that's like the development of human psychology. And so then there's the ideas of these two opposing things coming together and creating, I don't know, like the Ubermensch or something. But
Yeah.
going back to Job, I think it's a weird thing because um, it's kind of like what I want to talk about once we get a little bit further into this, which is the it seems to be a running concept through different mythologies because the Babylonians had their own version of Job, and
Mhm.
it has the exact same story basically. It's the dude is doing good, God tests him and takes everything away, and then God shows him that he's boss,
Yeah.
and then he gets all his stuff back. And
Yeah. So
yeah,
to go in on that, so basically the conclusion that we've arrived to is the conclusion that Job arrives to. So people's answer to this is Job's answer, which is, I lay my hand over my mouth. So in response to Job's questioning, God's just like, yo, dude, you're so tiny, I could just wreck you right now. And Job's like, all right, I'll shut up.
mm-hmm,
And then that action of like basically submitting and like being aware of all the just wrongs that are inflicted upon you as a human and just being like, I lay my hand over my mouth. That is, Jung argues that in that moment, Job becomes a more conscious being than Yahweh. And so what this
hmm,
provokes in Yahweh is the Christ. So because Yahweh, in a sense, becomes aware of this, like, holy smokes, like, this guy's cooking me. And he's like, all right, like, I need to understand more. So I'm going to incarnate Christ
hmm,
and increase in consciousness because the thesis that Jung has, by the way, this is not my belief. I'm just saying what's in the book. Dad, um, is that uh, is that Yahweh himself isn't conscious.
hmm,
He's a very instinctive being because he's so powerful. Like he's so beyond the realms of conscious activity. He doesn't need to be.
hmm,
And so he needs the reason why humans play such an important role for him is because he needs their worship. He needs their reflections on him to kind of define himself in a way, in a sense. And so then he's like, all right, like I need to, but then he realizes like this relationship with humans isn't going to work. Like I need to mend the gap. And so I was having previously, I was having thoughts on the death of Jesus being not only a way to save us, but a mending of the relationship on both ends.
hmm,
So it's like, so it's like, oh yeah, in order to forgive you, I'm going to kill my son. That doesn't make any sense if you think about it.
hmm.
Like, why would God,
Yeah,
in order, if God's all forgiving in his totality, why would he need to kill his son in order to forgive us?
yeah.
And
Okay.
so that's why I was having this thought. I was like, what if the plan behind that is not only to reconcile the relationship, but it's to mend a wound. It's to mend a God wound in us, in which we were wounded because we became conscious of God's totality and we became conscious of the fact that he's not a just God. He doesn't need to be a just God because he's God. He
And he's
doesn't need
beyond good and
to
evil.
impart justice.
Yeah.
And so the creation of justice is spoken into being with the creation of Christ. It's the Christ becomes the he sits at the right hand of God. And he's like, hey, like I'm gonna be your guy. Like that's why the only way to the Father is through me because he's the one kind of mediating that relationship.
Yeah,
So that's just a thought.
I've I've wondered. I was actually thinking that kind of along a similar line recently. I was wondering what the purpose of uh, God coming down to earth and
Mm,
living among us. Like,
mm.
what is the purpose of that? And people will say, oh, well, it was to atone for our sins. And it's like, well, right, but what is what is going on with him
In
coming
the
down to
heavenly
earth,
realm.
living
Yeah.
right and living among us, and then taking on our sins to then die? How is that fixing the
We
issue?
we have like a very selfish view of God where we think that everything that God does is directly for us.
Hmm.
And in doing so, we kind of like misrepresent God's totality because like we're like he's like God because he becomes a person, he is a person almost to a certain degree, where it's like he has things he wants to do and accomplish. And so the Christ thing is also a conquering of the accuser. It's God making a statement of like, I'm not gonna let Satan whisper in my ear anymore, essentially. Because it's like if God is all just, all forgiving, and all this stuff, why is he letting Satan be like, yo, like let me tempt this guy, like let's mess up this guy's life for fun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Uh
If
huh.
God's omniscient and he knows Job is gonna repent at the end, why would he even do it? And
Right.
it's like because Young says something interesting. He's like, God is omniscient, but he doesn't always consult his omniscience. And that's the
Yes.
reason why he ends up in these states where it's like you give them the fruit of tree and evil and they eat the fruit and he's like, oh shoot, like
Yeah.
crap.
Why did
And
you
like,
do that?
why did you do that? And it's like, wait, did he? And so like a lot of our like our problems with God comes from the fact that like we see that, it's like a lot of people would be like, okay, like why would he let us do that essentially? And it's like, well, yeah, he's omniscient. And this is the kind of like this thing we were talking about with like the cliff video that you sent me. And it's like we theology just becomes this way to explain this God that we've like romanticized and
Hmm.
idealized to this point that we always have to like defend this like perfect being. And it's like
Hmm.
we can't defend a perfect being because our understanding just falls flat.
Yeah.
And so we have to think of God as not perfect. He's not less than perfect or more than perfect. He's just kind of out of that range.
Yeah.
Like
It's
he's
like.
total, he's infinite.
Hmm.
And so it's like if you try to like ascribe perfection to him, you'll always fail. If you try to ascribe him all good, then you'll always fail. Like it doesn't work.
Right.
Um,
It's like what we've been saying. Like if you try to like put a box around infinity, like you're gonna miss it. Like
right.
you can't like you
If the God is
buy
absolute, yeah.
yeah buy
If
like
the,
logic does not let you do that. Like you can't put a wall around infinity as much as Rick and Morty makes you think you can. It's just like
so
it's
if the
not.
God is
Yeah.
absolute beauty and goodness, how should he encompass the fullness of life, which is beautiful and hateful, good and evil, laughable and serious, human and inhuman? How
Right.
can man live in the womb of the God if the God in himself attends only to one half of him? That's from Young.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like
Interesting.
it's
It's a good point.
and so
Yeah.
here's the thing is we can't become aware or conscious of these kind of like spiritual truths because they don't really manifest themselves in reality according to their true nature. And that's why Jung emphasizes the power of like the unconscious and these like deeply like and that's the importance of like the mythos and the myth and the stories and like the Bible and then other scriptures is because these are reflections of the unconscious and the meditative states where people are getting in touch with this reality behind our reality, these archetypes behind our reality.
So yeah, going off of that and then going back to something that you were touching on earlier, is that like the development of like the human consciousness? Is that like um basically like taking uh getting rid of like victimhood and like taking full responsibility because we're developing and we understand
Mhm.
that yes, this did happen to me, but also it's like I am what I make of myself
Yeah.
basically. Is that kind of what
Right.
that
It's
is a
like
little bit?
it's the thing with Joe, it's the thing with Job where he's like, this is happening to me, but I lay my hand over my mouth, like I humble
Mm-hmm.
myself
Yeah.
before these happenings. And the thing is, people don't want to do that. They want to be like, they want to not lay their hands over their mouth and be like, Job's friends are their responses to Job's suffering is exactly how people interpret the Book of Job. The way they're interpreting the Book of Job is like directly in the friends, because the friends are like, well, you were always evil since you were born, so naturally you're going to
Right.
suffer for something. Like, who are you to question and stuff?
Damn
And
Calvinists.
even God's like, yo, like God's like, bro, what are these guys talking about? You know what I mean? And Job is like that too. He's like, bro, what? Like, you guys are not helping me. Like, you're not recognizing my suffering for what it is.
They like come at him with theology instead of like
Right,
trying to
exactly.
make him a
Instead of
better
like
person. Yeah.
directly engaging with that relationship process that has to happen, like that reconciliation that has to happen. So it's kind of funny that like a lot of people like justify the Luka job because they're like, well, like look how it turned out. He got a bunch of stuff, and it's
Yeah.
like is that the picture you want to paint of God? Is like he can just do whatever he wants to us as long as he
You
like
gotta
gives
plant
us
your
more stuff
seeds,
at the
bro.
end?
Yeah.
Is that your idea of justice? You know what I mean? So it's like I think the important thing is like not really recognizing justice for what it is because when Job tries to understand God through justice, he fails.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the message behind Job is like when you try to ascribe these things to God, you're just gonna fall short
Mm-hmm.
because he's so beyond. And that's what Yahweh shows to Job. That's what God shows to Job is he's like dude, like you don't even get it. Like I'm freaking, I can do anything I want to you. Like I don't have to abide by your justice. I don't have to abide by anything. So people recognize this, but then they still fall into that trap of like, oh, God is still just.
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
like, does he have to be just to be your God? Like,
Yeah.
does your God have to like basically embody all these like characteristics that you deem are good and want to see in the world?
But Isaiah,
Is
he's all
that
good
God?
though. He's all good. He can't do evil.
Ah, he creates evil. I think it says
Yeah.
that somewhere in Isaiah, which they
Does
changed
it?
the translation to. They're like, and I cause destruction. It's like they say evil in the original, so let's get it right.
Yeah.
And so you have to realize that because, like, for example, like Satan is a son of God, and he's like he kind of embodies this spirit, this like evil spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why Satan is so important as symbolism is because it's this like perversion of God's nature. It's this like trickery upon God. And so we see this in like the Cain and Abel story where like Abel is very dear to God's heart because he's just like cool with whatever. He's like, yo, like I'm like rocking with God no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And Cain is like oh, he doesn't like my sacrifice. He doesn't do this and he starts taking matters into his own hand. So
Yeah.
I think like if you want to interpret the book of Job the right way, you have to like do the same process that like Job. I keep saying Job? It's Job, right?
Yeah. You gotta say
You
Job.
kind of have to keep doing the same process that Job is doing, where you're like, dude, why is this happening?
Uh huh.
Like, what is going on right now? You know what I mean?
Yeah. You have to
But
like.
people don't want to do that. People
Right.
just want to jump to the friends and just be like, oh, it's because of this. It's because you original sin is the reason. And it's like,
It's people wanting closure. They want like
right.
a full circle story, and the issue with the 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 issue with true stories is that they do end, but they also are happening all the time. So as soon as it ends, it immediately restarts, or it even like restarts like mid story, and it just keeps going, and that's what people don't like because that's like really hard to um, it's hard to like conceptualize, but it's also like it's kind of hard to live that way because you
Mhm.
constantly have to be on your toes about like everything, which I would say is part of that like taking a responsibility for things, like what we were saying earlier. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean, I don't know if we can do that completely. I mean, I think you have to strive to do that. Who knows if you can actually do it? But yeah.
Right. People don't have pattern recognition, so they don't recognize the fact that like history paints like an irregular pattern. If I can quote Jung's book, For the layman in these matters, the identity of a non-temporal eternal event with a unique historical occurrence is something that is extremely difficult to conceive. He must, however, accustom himself to the idea that time is a relative concept and needs to be complemented by that of the simultaneous existence in the bardo or pleroma of all historical processes. What exists in the pleroma as an eternal process appears in time as an aperiodic sequence. That is to say, it is repeated many times in an irregular pattern.
Could you explain maybe a little bit more about what he means by time being relative?
Yeah. So I think what he's getting at is the way that things occur in like the pleroma, or how that pleroma, what that can be conceived as, is like the happenings in the like the heavenly realms, like the heavenly courts of God, are these like events, like for example, like the creation fall event and stuff like that. Those things occur in our time as like repeated events, like what I was saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so like what you were saying, like how we think like a story has to come full circle, like the way that things work in that realm are like completely different, where it's like we see these like echoes of these happenings, like they kind of are occurring like all the time. It's just really weird and it's really funky, but it's like kind of like the only way to understand it is to kind of not understand it, is like to basically come to terms with the fact that like you kind of have to have this like detached appreciation of time and like think of like the occurrence, because like people think like, oh, creation and fall, it occurred and it happened already and we're done with that, but it's like, what if it's just always happening?
Yeah.
Like what if this like, and like that's kind of like the circle of life, like the process of life is like there's life being born and destroyed and being born and destroyed, and it's this circle and it's this cycle, and it's like there's no end to it,
Yeah,
right?
that is.
And so it's like there's this like eternal happenings that we can't even like see the future of or see the past of. It's like it's just really funky. It's really weird.
Do you know what all that is? That is
What is it?
that is the circle of irony.
The circle. Yeah, it's a circle of irony,
um,
bro. It all comes back to the circle. Wow.
it does, dude. Um, no, but let's see. Um, I was gonna talk about uh, yes. So that's what I was gonna say. That's what I've been saying about like time back in like May when I would start like asking people if they thought time existed, and everyone says like no, it doesn't exist as like a joke,
Mm,
but I was dead serious about
mm,
that when I said it doesn't exist. And of course, like it does exist and it doesn't exist. It exists in the way that you were describing, which is there is there is a uh, there is change, which implies that there is a past, present, and future, and because like one moment isn't the same from the next, but then time also, the way that we think about it, is is just a device created by humans to explain and conceptualize that past, present, and future, and that passing of
mm,
moments. Um,
mm.
yeah, and so you have to. I mean, you don't really have to stop thinking about it the way that we think about it, but it's just if you
You just
think
have to
about,
recognize the way we think about it
yeah,
in order to
and if
like
you leave it.
appreciate the numinosity of the topic.
Mhm,
Like people want to think of things as like singular and not attached to other things, but everything is attached to everything.
mhm.
Like everything
So
everywhere all at once or whatever that movie is, you know what I
yeah,
mean? It's like it's so hard to explain without like
well, yeah, and so that's what I
it's
was
so hard to
saying.
explain it without like reading things.
Yeah, so that's what I was
Like
saying about
it
earlier about because if you if you start with time just being like what it actually being is just past, present, and future, then
mm,
you limit your conception of what God can be to that.
mm,
And so if God is
in
outside
relation
of
to
that,
that, yeah.
then you can do whatever you want with that, and then you can say he's omniscient.
Mm,
The hard truth is that time is not that. Like time as that doesn't
mm,
exist. And so you have to start thinking about yeah, you can't think about God that way. Also, everything, everywhere, all at once. The directors of that movie graduated from Emerson, which is where I go to
oh,
school.
nice.
Yeah,
But
so they graduated like 10 or 15 years before I came here, but yeah.
And so it's like, okay, like if you're thinking all these things, like what's the like what like why? Like why even like think of these things? Why even like have that conscious activity? And Christ himself says, "Man, if indeed thou knowest what thou dost, thou art blessed. But if thou knowest not, thou art cursed and a transgressor of the law." So it's like I feel like God wants us to take life kind of seriously to a certain degree. Is
Mm-hmm.
like you should know why you think. You should know why you think the way you think. And you should try to find the patterns exemplified by like the activities of the human unconscious and of the spiritual lives of people. And then actually try to get to know God through that.
Mm-hmm.
And not by like some secondhand source and not by just some like theology or like some understanding. And it's hard and it's like why like what's the point? And it's like I feel like that's the only point.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I earnestly feel like that's the only point is to like really get to know God, right? And then like
Yeah. To know God and make Him known. Yeah.
people want salvation. People want to either just know that they're going to heaven or hell. And it's like if we want to talk about heaven and hell, like the only reason you would get to heaven is if you know God. Like he talks about it
And I think the
in
best way of
when Christ says like
yeah,
when you come to me and I can just be like I do not know you
it's like
and
it's
you're
you have
gone.
to in order to gain that knowledge or wisdom, you have to live. You can't just be like, oh, I'm safe now. I'm going to heaven. I'm gonna check out.
Right.
No, you have to. You, this is I said this to a few friends and they don't really agree with me, but you kind of have to live almost as if God. I used to say it's as if God doesn't exist. I'm not sure if that's quite right. It's more like you have to live as though He's not going to help you. I think
Mm.
that's a
Yeah, and I
that's a
think
smarter way to live
Job
it.
realizes that.
Yeah.
I think that's like the realization that Job comes to is
Hmm.
like, oh, he doesn't have to help me. Like he doesn't have to have anything to do with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because like we want God to have such a personal impact on our lives, and I think God does have a personal impact on all of our lives. And but it's like we're doing that thing that Job does. Is like, if I knew I was going to suffer all this, God, why did you even make me?
Hmm.
And it's like that's kind of just outside of your control. And so it's like you have to come to terms with the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to and just live.
Hmm.
Like you just have to kind of live and just uh distance yourself from the aspect of past, present, and future and of like, oh, this is why this happened to me. This is why this happened to me. And it's like you have to be deeply entrenched in that present, in that space where time doesn't really exist to like actually gain the scope of consciousness of like and that consciousness is your relationship with God and it is you interacting with God.
Do you think expanding your consciousness is a noble goal for your life? Like is that something
Um,
worth shooting towards?
yeah, and I think it is a noble goal, and I think that's the kind of the goal that a lot of the biblical characters are doing and pursuing,
Hmm.
like Abraham and stuff like Abraham, like Job, and like all the other like biblical heroes. Is they're deeply involved with this personal relationship with God, and it's the relationship with their own consciousness, and they're trying to expand it. You know what I mean? Because I think that
Hmm.
pursuit of God naturally expands your consciousness and your conscious activity because it causes you to think about things from a broader scale and a more non-attached scale to the things of this world. And it connects more things together and you start seeing strings tied together where God is at. And that's kind of the increasing consciousness is like I'm seeing the things that God is doing and moving through.
Hmm.
I think that's a noble pursuit. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I think the Bible states clearly that like ignorance is definitely not the way. He who
Right.
has ears, let him hear. And it's
You have to be wary of
like
pride though, and like
be
taking,
uh
yeah,
be wise as serpents and gentle as
yeah,
doves.
and you have to be worried about like, well, not worried, but you have to be wary of
Yeah.
the idol that you build in your head.
Mm.
You have to be wary of that, which is, of course, um, why Satan was kicked out of heaven.
And that's why that non-attachment that is shown like with like Job and like Abraham and men of faith is it's like you come to terms with all the conscious activities that your mind can occur, and then you're like,
Hmm.
Jesus, take the wheel type beat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's the leap of faith. I was reading Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard, and he says that uh, the uh, hold on. So the act of resignation does not require faith, for what I gain in resignation is my eternal consciousness. This is a purely philosophical movement that I venture to make when it is demanded and can discipline myself to make. Because every time some finitude will take power over me, I starve myself into submission until I make the movement. For my eternal consciousness is my love for God, and for me, that is the highest of all. But what I think the kind of I haven't finished Fear and Trembling, but I think the kind of like motion of thought he's moving towards is like that's not enough. Like it's not enough to just be eternally resigned, and it's not enough to just refuse all the things of this world and just be content with like the workings of God. But you need to make that kind of leap of faith of like there's still things that can be done in this world through God. And
Yeah,
through
that's
incarnating God and having God through me, I can legitimately do the things that I want to do and want to see done into the world through God, like through God and through me.
yeah, that seems to be like a pretty good reason if anyone was going to use it as a if anyone wanted to create a new religion or denomination, that would be a
Hmm.
great reason for doing it, which is you have to create something that a system that will make people realize that they need to get their lives together and be
Mm,
good, as opposed to having their fate sealed already from before they were even born. Because that seems like a bad idea to tell people that their fate is sealed
yeah.
from like
So
once they're
underneath
born. Yeah.
that quote note, I wrote, genuinely, what is this guy talking about? And then underneath that, I wrote, actions towards or against meaning are paradoxical against themselves, for the meaning is supplied by the spirit which flows between things and actions. The action should reflect a note of transcendence, an outcome of the desires of extended consciousness. The way our actions always reflect the thoughts that shape us, what do our thoughts reflect? Not only our actions, because our thoughts reflect those in the other sense, our thoughts reflect our hearts and what we choose to reflect with our hearts. But how can we, with any assurance, commit our hearts to anything other than our limited scopes of consciousness? Silence is the best answer, I guess. I lay my hand over my mouth. Why can we not really define God, but need a definition of Him in order to be provoked to any sort of action to stake our claims on eternity? Are we forever barred from any eternal thing? Submission to the finite is our only answer to grasp an eternity, for in this submission we gain a form of power over the infinite forces that move us. This is faith. How does one stay sane when comforted with these absurdities? How does one not adorn themselves with the mask of madness that begs to be worn? The resignation gains you God, but our nature coaxes something out of nature that is more than God. Alike to the Satan of Islam that wishes for something more than God, do we reflect this trait in our search of faith? So that's my schizo note underneath.
Hmm. It's a pretty good schizo
This
note.
is
Yeah.
the middle of me reading Fear and Trembling, and I'm freaking out. So this is not my conclusion. This is just kind of my
Hmm.
process.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
That is pretty cool. Huh. Um. So
I
Joe.
think this is
Yeah.
the darkness that we've been talking about. These are
Yeah.
the monsters.
They are. Um. So. So that's kind of like the friends from Job. That's like what they're shooting after. Um,
Hmm.
are there any other parts of Job you want to touch on, like the story?
Uh,
Because we've already kind of touched on like the beginning a
yeah.
lot, like in a in previous episodes when talking about Satan. Um, and then we've covered kind of the friends. Is there anything more with the friends that we need to talk about?
Let me see.
Okay.
Let me see
Um,
if I can find any quotes I wrote in my notes that speak
yeah.
about the friends. There's a lot
Um,
of good quotes in here though.
and then we've kind of talked about the ending a little bit. the ending is very similar, and by ending I mean the conversation between God and Job is very similar to. God uses a lot of imagery that would have been common in the Near East at that point, which was um, kind of the creation story of the
Mhm.
uh, Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, and sorry, not the Sumerians, but the Mesopotamians, and um, which is also kind of reflected in the Genesis creation account, but not so much. So, yeah.
Mhm. So I think Job, in a sense, at least what Young says, Job, the story of Job paints is like Yahweh comes to this decision to be seen as a like good God. And that's the conclusion that people reach is like through the New Testament is like the painting of the picture of God being aligned with his good side more so than his evil side.
Mm-hmm.
And this is necessary because we need an identification with the good in order to produce good. Because that's what God wanted us to do is he when we're producing bad, it's when we're going against his creation. So when God created things, he didn't think that he didn't well, I don't know if he thought that. He was like, yo, like why are they messing everything up? And that's why he like punishes so heavily in the Old Testament is because he's provoked to be involve himself with creation because we keep messing creation up.
Mm-hmm.
And so hence comes the birth of Christ and the the creation of a avatar of a God that we can follow and walk in the footsteps of so that we can become in tune with this good nature of God and this because that's the God that people want to worship is the good God, which is not wrong, which is what you should worship, but that's not all of God.
Mm.
He's more than just good.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting too because I was reading in Oriental mythology. It's kind of that quote that I was talking about that I read earlier, which
Mhm.
is that um, in Eastern thought there is no um, there is no fall of humanity. Like the Garden of Eden, like humanity. If someone from the East was to read that, they wouldn't say that humanity fell or like sin entered the world because that's not really
Mhm.
it's not really a concept that they have the idea of sin, and it's a big part of like
Mhm.
what like the Buddha is talking about, which is like you have to
Mhm.
achieve, you know, uh, whatever the Buddha wants to achieve, but um,
Enlightenment,
enlightenment, it's
nirvana.
yeah, like that. Nirvana is still waters without ripples. That's what it is. Um, so you want to achieve that, but that's not. It's it treats uh, it like kind of treats the fall as if it didn't happen, but
Mhm.
also it did happen. But it treats it that way at like the same time, and humans didn't cause it in the East.
Mhm.
Humans are not the cause of evil. There's like a separate
Mhm.
deity assigned to that to the causing
But the
evil.
West thinks humans are like innately bad. So
Mm-hmm.
like we side with our purely dark being. Like we think that we are purely dark and then through Christ we can become purely good. But I think that there's a sense that both of them are within us since the beginning. In the same way that since we are like we have God in us and we're made in the image of God, God is both good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are both good and evil. And what we choose to align ourselves with is what we end up being. It becomes kind of like the sum total of our beings. And that's like kind of like the reflection of like the scale and like the heart and the feather is like, are you like in your life, do you become purified? Do you walk with God? Do you seek to be good? Do you seek to be conscious, to be aware of like things? So it's like, I don't know, just I don't know, ask yourself some questions about your life because I think a lot of people get this. Like a lot of people get the like the overarching message of it of like, okay, we got to be good people.
Hmm.
But it's like if you just focus on that, then you lead yourself astray to many definitions of good that people have come to and tried to impart on you.
Hmm.
And because you're not assimilating your darker nature and like the evil inside you, and you're not becoming aware of that and becoming aware of the evil in God, then you, through repression, that eventually comes out. And then that's how we see the evil being imparted upon the world,
Which you could
is because all these
argue,
people,
you could argue that that's actually what happened in the Garden of Eden,
mm,
which is there was the idea of that we have to be good and we can't do this thing which is evil supposedly,
mm,
and what do you know, we end up doing it, and now we
mm,
hate ourselves for it. So
mm. Yeah, man. Repression is a nasty thing. And so I think that's why it's necessary to balance both. And you can only do that through awareness of both. So if you ignore one, it ends up consuming you. So I don't know.
yeah. Hmm.
I don't know, man.
Yeah,
I don't know. I have a lot to think about.
I was also thinking recently. I've started. Uh, there's a story I'm writing right now, and I was thinking about adding. Uh, so there's a movement in art called realism,
Hmm.
and in painting it has a slightly different meaning than what it does in film. And in film, what it means is that is not so much that what happens is realistic, but rather you kind of incite or create a sense of uh, you create the sense of this being real. So like gritty gritty doesn't equal realistic or real, because you could say
Hmm.
that gritty is realistic, but realistic is not the idea. It's not the thing to achieve.
Yeah.
What you want to achieve is you say that life it this is how life happens, and
Hmm.
a lot of it can be boiled down to there's this story happening, but there's also a bunch of other stories happening at the same time that we're not focusing on right now, but
Hmm.
whenever we like cut to a different scene or walk off or like the main character walks off screen, there's still actual people inhabiting the world who have their own stories, and so you like linger on them a little bit. So I've been thinking about how to do that in this one story that I'm writing right now, and yeah, I was gonna relate that somehow to what we were just talking about, but I forgot how to do it. So, anyways, it had something to do with the
Yeah,
character
that's
of God,
good.
I think, but and how humans
Somewhere in there.
conceptualize him. But I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. Think about it. All right.
Yeah,
Well, I gotta go. I gotta dip.
yeah, hmm yeah. We hit about
But good talk,
50
man.
minutes, I think. So yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Good talk.